Hi guys, this is a Korean Betty, Sora. I know, very long time no see, right? Okay, today I just to try something different. Usually I posted Korean teaching videos. Since you guys are studying Korean, I thought you might be interested in what's going on in Korean society. I'm going to make a video about topic like a Korean issue whenever some important issue happen in Korea. At the same time, I'm curious about your thought too. After watching video, please share your opinion or thoughts. And if you do that, I'd really appreciate it. Nowadays, wow. People around me and many Korean people, they started boycotting Japanese product after following the Japanese government export restrictions to South Korea. Many Korean, we thought this move is unfair. So they just made a list of Japanese products and brand and urging people not to buy those products. And including my friends, and many of them, they just canceled their plan to visit Japan to show how they are mad about this decision. So today's topic is Japan's export restrictions on high-tech materials to South Korea. I know this is a very sensitive issue between two neighboring countries, so I was a little hesitating to cover it, but this is really hot issue going on in Korea. Since I'm Korean, I could be biased to one side, but I will do my best to be objective position about this issue. I'm expecting that there will be many critical comments about it, but I'm ready to take it. And please share your opinion because, people have their rights to have their own perspective about issues. So I would be really happy to read your comments. Then let's get started. 1st of July, Japan announced that it would tighten restrictions on several key high-tech materials to South Korea. This is key materials when you make semiconductors and displays, which is really important part when you make a smartphone. This move is seen as a apparent response to last year's South Korean Supreme Court rulings against Japanese firms over a wartime forced labor. Last year, on 13th of October, the Supreme Court, it ruled that Japanese steel firms must compensate for South Korean victims about their damage. And to help you understand the meaning of this ruling, you guys have to know a bit about Korean history. Back to 1910, Japan took control of Korea, and the Japanese occupation of Korean Peninsula lasted until 1945. And between 1944 and 1945, many Korean people, they were conscripted by force to work for Japanese military manufacturers, and they made military supplies, and the working condition very poor. So many people just die there while working because mostly due to exhaustion and poor working conditions. And here is a controversial point about forced labor. Some people claim that Japan recruited Korean conscription laborers on newspaper. Korean people just applied for the job voluntarily. Japan was on the war and they needed people to fight against enemies, and they needed many resources. So they made a law, a national mobilization law in 1938, And as part of the law, the National Service Draft Ordinance was promulgated by the Japan's Prime Minister. So this law just empowered the Japanese government to draft the civilian workers to ensure that adequate supplies of labor in strategic war industry, which means, yeah, Japan just used Korean labor to support their war. Under the law, people had no choice to apply for it. So it seemed like they did that job by their will, but they didn't. So because the labor mobilization became compulsory after this law. And in 1997, two elderly victims filed a suit for damage against a Japanese metal company, Nippon Steel Sumitomo Metal Corporation in Japan. But they lost the suit in 2003 as the highest court in Osaka ruled that the company was not obligated to take on the financial liability of its former company. And in 2005, the elderly they brought the case to South Korea and filed a new suit with two other victims, and the lower court also turned them down. And they filed appeal at the Supreme Court, and in 2012, the landmark ruling came out. The top court quashed the lower's decisions and ordered a retrial in favor of the victims. And 1 year later, the Seoul High Court and the Busan High Court ruled that the Japanese company must compensate victims' damage. And then Japanese company appealed the decision, and last year the Supreme Court ruled out the company should compensate the victim's damage, recognizing the individual rights to sue for damage despite Korea-Japan Normalization Treaty in 1965. Okay, and what is the Normalization Treaty? Okay, here comes the former President Park Geun-hye's father, Park Jong-hee. He also had been president from 1963 to 1979, and his administration and Japan had the treaty where they just settled down the colonial era issues and normalized their relations between two countries. And then South Korea and Tokyo, they said in the treaty the rights to compensation were completely and finally resolved in return for Tokyo's $500 million economic cooperation fund provided to Seoul. And Tokyo maintained that the issue of forced labor by Japan had been resolved under the treaty. But the last year, again, the Supreme Court had a different perspective about this treaty. The court said that the treaty only covered the rights to compensation between nations, not individual rights to sue for damage. After the Supreme Court ruled out, the Japanese Foreign Minister Haru Kono called this ruling regrettable and totally unacceptable, saying this ruling clearly violated 1965 treaty. But Japan didn't initially deny the rights to make a claim. Even until 1990s, Japan's position was that the only rights to diplomatic protection was resolved had expired. In that treaty, the individual rights to make a claim still remain valid. Yeah, that was their initial position about that. After Japan's plan took off on July 4th, the Korean government, the South Korean government has decided to response by taking necessary measure, like lodging a complaint with WTO, World Trade Organization. I guess things get worse. This is a story about what's happening now. And I also find something very interesting part, interesting response, which is something that you might not expect. Asahi Shimbun, one of the 5 national newspapers in Japan, said, any trade policy that runs in counter to principle of free trade should be scrapped immediately. Wow, this is a pretty long story. Okay, now I wonder, what do you guys think about Japan's move? Why do you think that the Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, he just trying to slap the South Korea with the export restrictions? Well, some experts says this is all for upcoming election. I mean, he's trying to, he seems intent on rallying conservative resentment for South Korea to win the game, to win the election. I mean, do you think like that? Just feel free to write down your opinion, and I would be really happy to read your thoughts. Okay, and well, yeah, this is a pretty long story, but I'm really happy to share with you guys, and I'm going to see you next time.